So, of course, ESPN had to drop another list to give us something to talk about in the college football world because we're really in like the dead period. But end of this week, going into next week, as dead period ends, you're going to really be seeing the recruiting ramp up, and so will the content. But I want to talk about this list because there were some people really mad on the interwebs about this. And I'm going to kind of explain why it's kind of ridiculous to think that this list is that far off. Now, top 10 quarterbacks of the 2000s of college football. Whew. The Sooners, of course, landed 2 in the top 10. Not 1, but 2. Only program to do that. We're going to dive into that number 1 and why these folks were so mad. But before we do that, welcome to Unfair Sports. I'm your host, Jay. Thank y'all for pulling up to the channel. Let's dive into ESPN's list, which they do every year, and it keeps getting updated, and talk about the number 1 player on the list, which is, of course, the Oklahoma Sooner, which is our boy, Baker Mayfield, and why it makes sense and why folks were mad about it. Let's dive in. As y'all know, every year, ESPN puts this out there, and it just gives us something to talk about and reflect back on some great performances and stuff, because there were some great performances by some of these players on there. And I decided to just focus really here on the top 10. I think the top 10 is the one to really talk the most about, because that's probably the one that where folks really were kind of losing their mind. Like at number 11, you had Trevor Lawrence, and it was kind of crazy to see him that low because he came in as a freshman, was absurd, won a natty, but then that was about it, right? Like he made 2 more playoffs, but he didn't win anymore, right? He didn't get Clemson there, and of course, everyone talks about the talent that was around him. Totally get that as a statement, but at the same time, Trevor Lawrence is still elite in those days, but he just couldn't seal the deal for him. But when you go into 10, you had Robert Griffin III. Number 9, you had Marcus Mariota, Lamar Jackson at 8. Then Kyler Murray, of course, A&M, Oklahoma at 7. Watson at 6. Joe Burrow at 5. Tim Tebow at 4. Vince Young at 3. Cam Newton at 2. And, of course, number 1, Baker Mayfield. Now, this is where everybody started getting pissed. Like I saw folks kind of losing their mind there. Baker Mayfield, that's ridiculous. There's no world where I will take Baker Mayfield over Cam Newton or Joe Burrow in the season, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I get where you could be upset about that. But this whole thing and this whole experiment had nothing to do with the pro. It was college, and it was their career, not just the season. And this was the note that Bill Connolly over there at ESPN put in there when he named it. He said Newton, Young, and Burrow had the best seasons. Baker had the best career. And he did. Statistically, and the way he played and what he did, he had it. 14,000 passing yards, 69% completion percentage, 131 touchdowns, only 30 picks, with over 1,000 rushing yards and 21 rushing touchdowns. Baker had an elite college football career, and in the 2000s, yeah, he's the best, right? Everything he's able to do, and the biggest problem, of course, for us, and everybody points out is, of course, he came in under Bob Stoops. Bob Stoops passed the reins on to the last head coach in that regime, and all we needed was a competent defense that was prepared late in the season. Probably would have won a natty. That year was it. We always harp on the Georgia game, and I know, don't like to, but at the same time, remind y'all, team was nasty, team was elite, team had everything you needed to win. We just couldn't because all the pieces weren't there to do it, because you got to do it on both sides of the ball. You can't do it in just one. But, that's no knock to Cam. Cam walked in one full season there at Auburn, almost 300,000 passing yards, 1,500 rush. He had a monstrous season there at Auburn. And similarly to, got to give props to Vince Young. He had a great year. Good thing is, in one of those seasons, Vince lost 12-0 to Oklahoma, but I digress. Vince was electric, especially in that national championship game. Tebow was definitely deserving to be in that top 5. Him and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow had probably one of the best statistical seasons we'd seen. And the biggest thing with him, though, is that his entire team was riddled with nothing but NFL guys. The argument that Cam gets is, there's one NFL dude on that entire roster with him at that time. That team was Cam Newton. That was it, right? Baker had some good talent on both sides of the ball, and offensively just, they were monsters. That was when you started to see that bad boy churning. That's when you see Baker gets his Heisman. And then the next year, here at number 7, you get Kyler Murray, who gets his Heisman. And Kyler's season, good Lord, 4,300 yards, almost 1,500 rushing yards, and a combined 54 touchdowns in 1 year. Like, literally the closest, outside of him, you got Joe Burrow's 60 touchdown season with only 5 picks. Actually, he had 6 picks. He had 5 rushing touchdowns. He had almost as many rushing touchdowns as he had interceptions, which is nasty absurd. I love this list. I like going through it. There's been a few other Sooners that were on this list. Shout out to K-Ref for dropping this for us. Baker was at 1, Kyler at 7, Sam Bradford's 15th. Jalen Hurts made it up there at 27th. He had a great season here. Throwing 4,000 yards, rushing for 1,200 yards in that season. So he didn't have... he had a pretty solid season here just as a Sooner. You got Jason White, the Heisman Trophy winner, and then Landry Jones at 43. In the top 80, Oklahoma finished with 6 players in the 2000s, which is pretty darn good. Can't beat that. It means Oklahoma's producing quarterbacks, and granted, you really had 2 of them that was really underneath only the last regime. The first one was here before, and then he continued with that regime. He was his OC at the same time, but Landry, Jason White, Sam Bradford and Jason White, with those 2 as Heismans, the good thing, it keeps Oklahoma in the consistency of being QBU. You can argue with whoever you want to about that. Argue with your mama. I don't care. But having 3 dudes drafted number 1, can't beat that. And then Hurts was second round. He probably should have been first because what he's doing with the Eagles kind of proved that point, right? Should have. Now, the unfortunate thing is when you're drafted that high, you're typically sent to bad teams, and you just got to hope that you can survive. Usually bad teams and bad coaching. So NFL-wise, it ain't always on the quarterback. Like Trevor Lawrence, look at him. That man is just trying to survive the game right now, what they're doing to him in Jacksonville. But I digress. Good thing is for Oklahoma, we still got 3 starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now with Baker, Hurts, as well as Kyler. And I don't see that changing. Arizona's not going to move on from Kyler right now. He came back healthy and he looked good. So, I don't know. Hop in the comments. Let me know how y'all feel about that. What y'all think about Oklahoma landing that many players in the top 80? 6? Whew. Sooner Nation, baby. If you made it this far, you like the content, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. Dropping a bunch of college football content, man. Talking a lot of OU football and college football in general. Definitely had a good time doing it. We got a lot more content coming down. I got a few more videos I've been editing, just haven't put out because it's just been so slow and dead. And luckily, my job's keeping me even busier. So keep your eyes open. We'll talk soon. Peace.